Once upon a time, there was a lady named Aggie. The first moment Aggie can remember from her life was the glinting of her mother's wedding ring as it sparkled in the darkness. The light all around caused the small diamond to dance in its setting as if alive and reveling in the splendor of being alive. It was such a tiny little thing, caught in a single fleeting moment, yet this moment held such significance for the woman that Aggie would become. She can remember in that moment wanting to reach out for her mother's hand, guided by that gyrating twinkle of refracted light. However, her mother was too far away, and Aggie could hardly move under the weight that pinned her minuscule body. Aggie did not realize it at the time, but so much of this moment would come to represent the greatest struggles of her life. The simplicity of wanting such an insignificant thing as to move her body and the world that told her no. And all the while there was something so significant in this need. For as the flames leapt higher, causing the sparkle of her mother's ring to flail with colour and light, all Aggie could do was turn to look at the stars. The stars that also sparkled through the dust and smoke and cinders that meandered through the air. Stars that were once the familiar ceiling of their home. Stars now revealed by the Luftwaffe's fury. Aggie cannot remember anything beyond that moment, even though the events must surely have been important. Her mother's funeral? There must have been a burial, she thought. Her travelling by train to the country and her mother's arms? Even such fear and trepidation could not prevail in the grip of the memory's fickle abstraction of value. She cannot even remember the exact moment she realized her father was never coming home, and how a man she had never known could cause such heartache through label alone. That word, father. How the world placed such providence in that term. How agonizing the blow when she knew that hers was never to return. Still, she could not appreciate why she felt so strongly about some faceless figure who had gone to war long before she had the foresight to make a memory of him. She must have been a rather asinine child, Aggie would ponder when she was older, to have been so frivolous with something so meaningful. What Aggie did remember was the warmth of her grandmother's embrace, the soft knit of her baggy cardigan which seemed to swaddle her with a womb-like fervour, the sweet aroma of Parma violets, apple blossom and homemade gingerbread. Ah, the gingerbread! And sweet blackberry pies and soft sponge cake, flavoured with a thick lashing of strawberry jam. Aggie could remember so clearly her grandmother teaching her the intricacies of pastry and spiced buns and rich puddings. They would live their days in the kitchen, baking up fantastically sweet treats to enjoy when the days turned to dusks and the long nights set in. Aggie never knew of the hardships her grandmother faced, the loss of her son to a terrible war, the rationing that left the pantry desolate, the orphaned child who was sent to remind her of the boy she would never see again, except when she gazed into those eyes, wide pools of fear and longing and hope. The long, relentless circumferences of blue and shimmer that forged the path, begging for the slightest sliver of compassion. Aggie's grandmother decided that never again would this child know of lack and loss and longing. Her days from this day would be filled with sweetness, care, and love. And so it was for many years, years of wondrous moments that long outlasted the horrors of the world, the conflict, the fascism of people. The first time Aggie tasted coconut, still warm from the oven and baked into a perfectly moist macaroon. The summer afternoon when a flutter of butterflies was drawn to a huge bowl of honey biscuit batter, and they landed all over Aggie to feast upon the spattering which decorated her dress. The first time she visited the city she had been forced to leave over a decade before. The lights and glitter of Piccadilly Circus, the glamour of Theatreland, the grandeur of Fitzrovia. She had wandered for hours, mesmerized by the extravagance of it all, the sprawl and the soar, the promise and the portent, the department stores and the dance halls. She marvelled at each street and square, so pristine, a far and distant memory of the carnage that was as yesterday, to that single moment of the ring in the darkness as flames drew near. As the evening arrived and the city turned into a dance of fireflies, the young woman hurried back to the station and her train home. In her haste, she had made the simplest of mistakes in turning down an alleyway that led not to the wide arches of smoke and majestic steam engines, but instead to another moment. A moment where, once again, Aggie found herself powerless to move, struggling to reach out to the glinting of a streetlight and the safety it promised. But now, just as when she was lying in the rubble, she could not move or scrabble even an inch towards the twinkling star that was so terribly close and yet insurmountable in reach. For the second time in her life, Aggie felt as if her body was not her own. It had been taken from her by the man in the darkness. She did not want the child, or the shame that came with the implications of having the child. Everyone in the village looked at her differently now, a scorn that was loosely shrouded with feigned sympathy. Everybody, except grandmother, who was still kind in every gesture. Yet the act of compassion could not sweeten the sour taste of this baby. She yearned for release, reprieve, the undoing of a lock for which there was no key. Aggie was not permitted to choose her path once again, for in this desire it was the Mother Justice who forbade her from movement. The promise of her scales to protect and uphold her rights hastily snatched away when the need for autonomy became brutal in its honesty. And so the baby was born and grew into a young child with deep and wide oceans of blue that sparkled like cinders and street lamps. And every time Aggie looked upon her son, she would see that man, barely visible in silhouette against the night sky, just a feature here and there, enough to bear resemblance in her own child's face. She was reminded each day, just as her grandmother had been, of what she had lost in life. And just as her grandmother had done, she taught her child to bake. Together they would create cakes and sweets and little gingerbread houses, iced with colours vibrant and exotic. And those long days of sweetness and giggles and sunshine caused the memory of that dark alley to bleach in the light, and an uncomfortable love to flourish. The love for her son that was both the compunction to run away and the crushing, unbearable weight that forced her to stay. Until once again her right to choose was taken away from her by the slightest of things. An unseeable, unknowable microbe that slipped unnoticed into the child's lungs, and through the refusal to leave, took him from her when she was just learning how to love. The little headstone that decorated the freshly dug earth seemed to her a weight far outweighing the size of the stone. It was so small and yet so heavy. Perhaps it was the density of this insignificant monolith, or maybe the larger sibling that stood next to it, the granite eulogy for her grandmother. Life continued, as life does for those fortunate enough to partake in its ebbs and eddies. The man she met and fell in love with, the diamond on her hand that glinted as her mother's had so long ago, the tiered cake she had baked herself, adorned with 2 gingerbread people, both dressed in their finest garb of piped icing. The wife she became, hollowed out by the man who was rarely there, except when he returned to carve away a little more of her self-esteem. The home she was bound to and crushed by, to the point where she vowed never again to live, imprisoned by bricks and stone and cement. The nights when he would come home drunk and she would find herself back in that alleyway or under the stars and rubble, she would almost wish for the nights when he brought home some other woman. But the sounds that came through the walls when he did chewed her up inside as she lay paralyzed in her cold, unfeeling bed. When he finally left her, she felt, as she had always done, both sad and elated, pulled down by 2 equal and conflicting paths with such force as to rip her in half. Yet the reality was, she just stayed still, there and somehow not there. It was only when she could take no more of laying down in the path of life's beautiful, terrible landslide of time that she woke one morning, got herself washed and dressed, and left the house, her old life and the memories that caused her pain. She travelled the world and saw such sights, so many marvels and wonders as to fill many lives to the brim. And eventually, old and weary, she found herself settled in a little patch land, held kindly within the arms of an ancient forest. Still sparkly of eye and mindful of her past, she remembered her vow never to live in a prison of stone again. So She did what she loved. She baked, and she baked some more. Please like, subscribe, and if you want to know more, discover how to captivate, entertain, and immerse your audience through digital media with Jez Ray at speakerperformance.online. Jez Ray's Happy Endings was created by Jez Ray and Martin Pentecost, presented by Jez Ray. Copyright 2022, an Empower Publishing production.